Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today we are diving headfirst into, well, probably the most mysterious and maybe the most profound sensory experience we have.
Really is fascinating.
It's the one that seems to hold this incredible key to our deepest, sometimes totally forgotten memories. We're exploring that powerful, occasionally quite disorienting phenomenon known as the Proust effect.
Ah, yes, the Proust effect. It's such a perfect name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it really captures the heart of the experience.
Which is?
It's that involuntary thing, that immediate, utterly transporting flood of memory that just washes over you, triggered by nothing more than a simple scent.
Right. It's not just remembering a fact like a date or a name.
No, not at all. It's like being physically relocated, just for a second, to a moment deep in your past. The feeling is incredibly vivid.
And the classic example, the one that gave it the name, comes from Marcel Proust's huge novel, In Search of Lost Time.
That's the one. The narrator dips a little Madeleine cake, a small, shell-shaped sponge cake, into his cup of lime blossom tea.
And that single action, that precise combination of taste and smell, boom!
Exactly, boom. It instantly unlocks this entire, incredibly detailed world from his childhood that he thought was completely lost and forgotten. It's really the textbook literary definition of what scientists now call an odor-evoked autobiographical memory. Or OEAM for short.
OEAM. Okay. And I think pretty much everyone listening has their own personal archive of these OEAMs, even if they don't call them that.
Oh, absolutely. Just take a second and think about it. You know, maybe the smell of waxy crayons. For a lot of people, that instantly places you right back at a tiny desk in your elementary school classroom.
Yeah. And you don't just remember the crayons. You might suddenly feel the specific temperature of that room or the squeak of the chairs.
Precisely. Or perhaps it's that very distinctive, sharp, almost metallic scent of chlorine.
Yeah. Swimming lessons definitely taste me back. Maybe not always fondly.
Maybe not. But it transports you immediately, right? Back to those maybe difficult summer swimming lessons, even if they were decades ago.
Or, I don't know, a specific kind of furniture polish, maybe one your grandparents always used. That smell can bring the entire atmosphere of their house, the quality of the light, the particular quiet, maybe that feeling of safety, right into the room with you now.
It's uncanny. These memories, they just arrive totally unbidden. You weren't searching for them. They're unexpected, and they carry this emotional weight, this texture, this sort of completeness.
That even the most vivid photograph or maybe even an old home video just can't seem to replicate. It feels different, more real somehow.
Exactly. So that really sets up our mission for today. We want to understand why. Why does our sense of smell have this unique, almost privileged power over our memory and our emotions, especially when you compare it to sight or sound or touch?
What makes it so special?
And the answer, as we're going to explore, isn't some kind of magic, though it can feel like it. It actually lies in a very peculiar, kind of beautiful, and incredibly ancient piece of our neuroanatomy. The olfactory system, our sense of smell, it's wired into the brain in a way that fundamentally bypasses the standard rules of sensory processing that all the other senses have to follow. It's got a shortcut.
A shortcut straight to memory and emotion. Okay, let's unpack that unique neurobiology then, because this sounds like where the journey of a smell molecule really diverges dramatically from, say, a sound wave or a light particle hitting our senses.
It absolutely does.
So normally when we see something or hear something or touch something, where does that sensory information go first in the brain?
Okay, so for almost everything else, vision, hearing, touch, even most aspects of taste, the signals follow this highly centralized kind of mandatory route. They all have to travel first through a very important structure deep in the brain called the thalamus.
The thalamus, right. I've heard it called the brain's main sensory relay station or something like that.
That's a perfect description. Precisely. You can think of the thalamus as the central sorting facility for incoming sensory data, or maybe like the brain's busy reception desk or gatekeeper.
Okay, and its job is?
Its job is absolutely crucial. It takes in all this raw sensory data pouring in from your eyes, ears, skin, tongue. It processes it, filters out noise, figures out what's important, and then routes it to the correct specialized area of the cerebral cortex. the brain's outer layer for conscious perception and higher-level analysis.
So it's like the air traffic control center for sensations, imposing order on all the incoming signals.
That's a great analogy, yeah. It decides where everything needs to go for proper processing. So if you see a red ball, that raw visual data hits your eyes, gets converted to nerve signals, travels to the thalamus.
Which then says, okay, this is visual information, important features are red and round, send it up to the visual cortex for detailed analysis.
Exactly. Everything gets filtered, categorized, and directed before it really becomes a conscious thought or gets properly logged into memory. It's a very organized, hierarchical process.
Okay, that's the standard procedure. But you're saying smell is the rebel, the rule breaker.
Smell is the revolutionary outlier, absolutely. The whole process starts differently. Olfactory receptor neurons, the cells that actually detect odor molecules, are located high up in your nasal cavity in the little patch of tissue.
Right.
And these neurons are fundamentally different from other sensory receptors. Get this.
Yeah.
They are actual neurons, part of the central nervous system, but they extend directly from the brain out into the environment of your nasal passage.
Wait, so parts of our brain are basically hanging out directly exposed to the air we breathe. That sounds vulnerable.
It's a very unusual and direct physical arrangement, unique among the senses. It's like the outside world has this tiny direct line into the nervous system right there. And another fascinating thing, these neurons actually regenerate throughout our lives, which is also quite unusual for neurons.
Wow, okay, so these special neurons detect an odor molecule. Then what? Where does the signal go?
The signal gets passed from these receptors up to a structure called the olfactory bulb, which sits right at the front of the brain, just above the nasal cavity.
Okay, the olfactory bulb still sounds fairly standard so far.
But this is where the radical detour happens. Instead of relaying the signal back to the thalamus like all the other senses,
It doesn't go there.
nope, it skips it entirely. The signal travels from the olfactory bulb and projects immediately and directly into core parts of the limbic system.
The limbic system, that's the older, more primal part of the brain, right?
Yeah.
Associated with emotions and memory.
Exactly. So the most significant difference is that odor information gets to skip the thalamus, skip that whole meticulous sorting and filtering process.
So what's the consequence of taking that direct, unfiltered route? Does it mean the information is less processed or maybe less accurate in some objective way?
Well, in terms of conscious high-level analysis, maybe you could say it's less processed initially. The information isn't immediately categorized or intellectually labeled in the way visual information is. But what we gain from this shortcut is immense. We gain privileged access, we gain incredible speed, and we gain profound emotional impact. This direct, unfiltered connection is the absolute neurological foundation of the Proust effect.
Right, because it gives smell this instantaneous, raw, almost high-priority access straight into the brain's core emotional and memory centers. No waiting in line at the thalamus reception desk.
Precisely. It's like having a VIP pass straight to the emotional control room.
Privileged processing. I like that term. It perfectly captures why these smell-triggered memories feel so visceral, so gut-level. The information arrives raw and immediate without all the layers of classification or conscious interpretation that the cortex usually applies.
That's it, exactly. And the two most critical destinations within that limbic system, the ones that receive this direct input from the olfactory bulb, are the amygdala and the hippocampus.
Okay, let's map those connections out, because you said they're central to understanding this link between smell, emotion, and memory. Let's start with the amygdala.
Right, the amygdala. This is a small, almond-shaped structure, but it's a powerhouse. It's widely recognized as the brain's core engine for processing emotions, particularly things like fear, pleasure, and assigning emotional significance to events or stimuli.
The emotional relevance detector.
Kinda, yeah. And because olfactory information hits the amygdala so directly and rapidly, a smell can trigger a really powerful emotional reaction, whether that's deep comfort, poignant nostalgia, or even sudden inexplicable fear before your conscious brain has even had time to identify or name the source of that scent.
So that's why sometimes you walk into a room or smell a particular perfume on someone and you get this instant, overwhelming feeling good or bad before you even think, oh, that smells like lilies, or that reminds me of my third grade teacher.
Exactly. The emotional verdict arrives before the cognitive label. It feels like this undeniable gut feeling or intuition because, neurologically speaking, the emotional circuit has been activated before the higher-level cognitive identification circuits have fully engaged.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so that's the amygdala, the direct line to emotion. What about the second structure, the hippocampus?
The hippocampus. This structure is located right nearby, sort of nestled close to the amygdala within the limbic system. And the hippocampus is absolutely crucial for forming and retrieving specific types of memories, particularly episodic memories.
Episodic memories, those are the memories of specific events, right? Things that happened to you personally, situated in a particular time and place, like remembering your 10th birthday party or your first day at a new job.
Precisely. It's the memory of the what, where, and when of your life experiences. It's the brain's mechanism for recording the episodes of your autobiography.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. A memory triggered by something I see or something someone says to me. That signal has to go through the thalamus, get relayed up to the cortex for interpretation, and then maybe connect down to the amygdala and hippocampus to retrieve associated feelings or context. It's a multi-step, somewhat indirect process.
That's a good summary of the standard route. Yeah.
Yes. But with smell, the olfactory input skips the thalamus, bypasses the cortex initially, and plugs directly into both the amygdala emotion center and the hippocampus episodic memory center almost simultaneously.
Exactly. The odor information arrives at these critical structures raw, fast, and unfiltered. This means the scent itself becomes instantaneously and deeply woven into the very fabric of the memory as it's being formed.
So the smell isn't just associated with the memory later on, it's part of the initial encoding process in a very fundamental way.
Precisely. And because of this direct, privileged wiring established during encoding, that specific scent later becomes an incredibly effective, almost unavoidable trigger or cue for retrieving that entire past event. And crucially, it brings back not just the facts of the event, but the rich emotional state that accompanied it.
Which explains the vividness and the feeling of being transported back. You're not just recalling information, you're reactivating the original emotional and contextual network.
That's the essence of the Proust effect right there in the wiring.
Okay, this direct wiring is key. But to really understand why smell gets this special treatment, this evolutionary shortcut, you said we need to look way back, right, to our evolutionary history.
We absolutely do. To truly grasp why smell is wired this way, why it gets this VIP pass, skipping the thalamic cue, we have to appreciate just how ancient this sensory system is. The olfactory system isn't just old. It is arguably the most ancient sensory system we possess.
Right. When you think about the history of life on Earth, complex vision like ours, or sophisticated hearing, those are relatively recent evolutionary developments. They require complex structures.
They do. But virtually every organism, going way back to the simplest single-celled bacteria drifting in the primordial soup, and certainly the first multicellular animals, needed some form of chemical sensing to navigate their world and survive.
They had to smell their environment in a basic sense.
That's exactly right. For early life forms, chemical sensing wasn't just helpful, it was absolutely fundamental for survival. They needed to answer immediate, existential questions based purely on the chemicals around them. Is this water toxic? Is that thing floating nearby food or poison? Is this chemical trail leading me towards a predator or towards a mate?
The entire world, for them, was experienced primarily through chemical signals. Their reality was a chemical reality.
It really was. So the brain's earliest priority, its foundational sensory capability, was the ability to detect and interpret chemicals in the environment, essentially, the sense of smell or taste, which were likely less distinct back then.
Okay, so smell detection was priority number one from an evolutionary standpoint. How did that shape the brain's architecture over millions of years?
It had profound and lasting architectural consequences for our modern human brains. Here's the really mind-bending part. In early vertebrates, the brain structures that were destined to eventually evolve into the core components of our limbic system.
You mean the parts that handle emotion and memory, like the amygdala and hippocampus we just talked about?
Yes, precisely those structures.
Yeah.
They didn't just develop alongside the olfactory processing centers, they essentially grew out of them.
Yeah.
The limbic system, in many ways, originated as an elaboration of the brain regions initially dedicated to processing smells.
Whoa, hold on. That flips the usual perspective. We tend to think of the amygdala and hippocampus as general-purpose emotion and memory centers that happen to receive input from smell, among other things.
Right.
You're saying that these core human mechanisms for feeling fear, experiencing pleasure, forming lasting memories, feeling safe or threatened, they actually originated as specialized tools specifically for interpreting the meaning of chemical signals detected by the olfactory system.
That's the evolutionary trajectory, yes. The neural systems designed for the most fundamental survival responses approach this scent. Food mate. Avoid that scent. Poison, predator. Remember where the good smells are. Fear at the locations with bad smells. These systems evolved in incredibly close anatomical and functional association with the ability to sense chemicals. They were initially part of the same integrated system.
Okay, that's a huge insight. This deep ancient history means that even today in our complex brains, smell remains intimately, fundamentally connected to our most primitive, survival-driven responses. The wiring laid down hundreds of millions of years ago is still there and still highly influential.
It absolutely is. The ability we have now to consciously analyze a smell, identify it as, say, lavender or freshly baked bread, and appreciate its nuances, that's a relatively recent sophisticated layer added on top by our expanded cerebral cortex.
That's the thinking part of the brain.
Right. But the immediate, visceral, gut-level reaction, whether it's an unconscious pull towards something or a sudden urge to recoil that response, is often being driven by that ancient wiring connecting smell directly to the limbic system. The wiring that screams danger, retreat, or safety approach is incredibly old and still very powerful.
It makes perfect evolutionary sense. You needed that immediate reaction to survive. You couldn't afford to wait for the cortex to carefully analyze whether that predator smell was really a predator this time.
Exactly. Hesitation could be fatal. That ancient wiring ensures that the primitive emotional response often gets priority, especially when it comes to instantaneous impact and memory retrieval tied to smells. When a significant odor hits your receptors, your brain, at a very deep level, still treats it with the potential urgency of a critical survival cue.
Which helps explain why the emotional response feels so powerful and so immediate, even if the scent is just, chlorine from a swimming pool or disinfectant from a hospital. The system is primed for high alert.
That's a good way to put it. It's primed. So even in our complex modern lives, where we rely so heavily on vision and hearing, this ancient system means we're probably using smell for instant environmental assessment and social judgment far more than we consciously realize.
Yeah, think about how quickly a smell can influence your first impression of a place or even a person. That initial feeling, oh, I feel comfortable here, or, something feels off about that, could very well be rooted in an ancient olfactory signal that completely bypassed your logical, analytical thought processes.
It's operating constantly, subtly shaping our feelings and decisions, often below the radar of conscious awareness.
Okay, so the neuroanatomy and the evolutionary history provide a compelling explanation for why smell has this unique power. But the subjective experience, that powerful Proust effect, while universally recognized, isn't just anecdotal anymore, right? Science has actually studied this systematically.
Oh yes, extensively. Decades of careful research, notably by scientists like Dr. Rachel Hurst and others, have moved way beyond just collecting interesting stories. They've rigorously compared odor-evoked memories, those OEMs we mentioned, to memories triggered by other types of cues, like words or pictures.
And what do these studies consistently find? Are OEAMs measurably different?
The differences are significant, they're measurable, and they show up consistently across different studies and populations. When researchers ask participants to rate the qualities of memories triggered by different senses, ODAMs are almost always rated as more emotional, more vivid, and significantly more evocative than memories brought back by, say, seeing a photograph or hearing a related word.
More evocative, meaning they bring back more associated detail.
Yes, and crucially, they are far more likely to trigger that intense, almost uncanny feeling of being there again. It's not just remembering the past, it's a feeling of complete sensory and emotional immersion in that past moment, like a brief mental time travel.
And this richness isn't just about the smell itself, is it? It's like the smell acts as a key that unlocks a whole package deal.
Exactly. The smell of, say, old books in a library doesn't just remind you of the smell of old paper. It might instantly bring back the feeling of the worn leather chair you sat in, the specific quality of the quiet in that building, the way the sunlight streamed through a particular window, maybe even the faint anxiety about an upcoming exam.
The memory feels whole, multisensory, and complete, not just a recalled fact.
Precisely. And beyond the emotional intensity and vividness, there's another clear difference that emerges strongly from the research: a temporal distinction.
Meaning when the memories are from.
Yes. If you give someone a verbal cue, like the word bicycle, or show them a generic photograph, the autobiographical memories they tend to retrieve are often relatively recent, maybe from the last few years, or their young adulthood.
Okay, standard memory recall tends to pull from more recent times. But what happens if you use a smell as the trigger, an OEAM trigger?
Then the pattern shifts dramatically. The memory that surfaces tends to be much, much older, Smells are incredibly effective cues for accessing memories, typically dating back to childhood and early life, often from the period before the age of 10 or 12.
Wow. So olfaction seems to have this special key for unlocking the earliest chapters of our personal history. That really helps explain why the Proust effect is so often tied up with feelings of nostalgia for our formative years.
It certainly seems to be a primary mechanism for accessing those very early, deeply encoded experiences that might be harder to reach through purely verbal or visual recall.
And that involuntary nature you mentioned earlier adds to the feeling of authenticity, doesn't it? We don't consciously decide to search for these specific childhood memories. They just erupt into our consciousness when the right scent hits, almost overwhelming the present moment.
Absolutely. It feels less like a deliberate reconstruction and more like a genuine retrieval. And neuroscientists have actually been able to watch this happen in the brain using functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI studies.
Brain scans that show which areas are active?
Right. These studies have mapped unique patterns of brain activation specifically for smell-triggered memories, patterns that look different compared to when memories are triggered by words or pictures.
And which brain regions light up more strongly for these OEAMs? Is it the ones we discussed earlier?
Yes, exactly, the key players. The fMRI studies consistently show greater activation in the amygdala, that emotion center, the hippocampus, the episodic memory hub, and also in a critical intermediary structure called the entorhinal cortex.
The entorhinal cortex, what's its role?
Think of the entorhinal cortex as the main gateway, or the primary information highway that feeds sensory information into the hippocampus for memory formation. It's like the main entrance lobby to the memory-making department.
Okay, so when you smell something that triggers an old memory, the scan shows the smell activating the gateway, entorhinal cortex, the main memory storage and retrieval center, hippocampus, and the emotion center, amygdala, all firing together strongly.
That's the pattern, yes. A tightly integrated network firing up, which perfectly explains the subjective experience why these memories feel so vivid, so emotionally charged, and so true.
And this strong direct activation leads to another really interesting characteristic of OEAMs you mentioned earlier, their persistence.
Ah, yes, the persistence factor. This is really crucial. Think about it. If you tell a funny story about something you saw, the first few times you tell it, it might still feel genuinely amusing. But tell it 20 times.
Yeah, the emotional kick fades. It becomes more of a performance, a retelling of facts.
Exactly. The emotional impact diminishes with repetition as the memory becomes more of a cognitive narrative, a story you tell yourself. But research suggests that smell-triggered memories resist this kind of emotional fading much more effectively.
Why is that? Why do they stay emotionally potent even if you encounter the trigger scent repeatedly? Is it because, as you said, it's less about intellectually reconstructing the memory and more about emotionally re-experiencing it each time?
That seems to be the key. Because of that direct hardwired connection between the olfactory bulb and the amygdala, every time you encounter that specific trigger scent, you're essentially running a fresh, high-voltage current right back to the original emotional power source of that memory.
Okay, give us an analogy to really nail this down. Why does the emotional data stay so fresh with smell?
Okay, think of it like this. For a memory recalled verbally or visually, especially after time, you're often like someone reading a faded photocopy of an old diary entry. You have to intellectually reconstruct the scene and infer the emotion you probably felt back then.
Right. You remember that you were happy, but you don't necessarily feel the happiness intensely again.
Exactly. But for a smell-triggered memory, it's more like plugging an old lamp directly back into the original wall socket.
Yeah.
Every single time you encounter that scent, the direct olfactory amygdala pathway is reactivated anew. You aren't just remembering the associated emotion. You are instantly and powerfully re-experiencing a measure of that original emotional state. The connection is live, not just recalled.
So the emotional charge is regenerated each time, keeping the memory vivid and potent, resisting that fading effect we see with other types of memory recall.
That's the core idea behind the persistence factor, yes. The emotional intensity stays remarkably robust over time.
That's a really fascinating distinction. And this idea of potent early memories brings us back to the timing of memory encoding. We often hear about the reminiscence bump in memory research.
Right, the tendency for adults to have a disproportionately high number of vivid memories from their adolescence and early adulthood, roughly ages 15 to 25.
Yeah, a period often associated with forming identity, first love, major life choices. But smell, as you mentioned earlier, seems to have an even earlier peak for its most powerful memories.
It really does. The research points quite strongly toward an earlier critical period specifically for olfactory imprinting. Smells that we encounter frequently or significantly during our childhood, especially within that formative window of roughly ages 5 to 15, seem to be the most likely candidates to become powerful, lifelong OEAM triggers.
Ages 5 to 15. That's interesting. It's largely before that typical reminiscence bump period of late teens and early 20s. Why might that specific childhood window be so particularly potent for locking in smell memories?
Well, there are likely a few converging reasons. Firstly, from a developmental standpoint, the olfactory system is one of the very first sensory systems to fully mature. It's basically operating at peak capacity very early in life, while other systems, especially higher cognitive functions, are still developing.
So the hardware for smelling is fully online early on.
Exactly. Secondly, think about how children experience the world compared to adults. Children tend to absorb raw sensory information much more directly without the constant layers of cognitive filtering, labeling, and analysis that adults automatically impose.
Right. As adults, we encounter a smell and immediately try to categorize it. Oh, that's bleach, or someone's cooking onions. We put it in a box.
We do. A child, however, is more likely to simply experience the scent directly and associate it, unfiltered, with the entire emotional context happening at that moment. So a particular disinfectant smell isn't just cleaning chemical to a 5-year-old. It might become deeply fused with the feeling of visiting grandma's house where I feel safe and loved.
It's a direct, uncategorized link between the sensation and the feeling.
Exactly. This leads to stronger, less processed, more emotionally pure associations being laid down in memory. And because they are less mediated by language and cognitive filters, these early olfactory memories seem to be more robust and persistent over the lifespan.
It really highlights the difference between intellectually labeling something versus truly experiencing it. If you experience it directly and unfiltered, especially during those formative years, the memory gets etched much deeper, ready to be reactivated decades later by the same scent.
That seems to be a crucial part of the story, yes.
Okay, so we've covered the wiring, the evolution, the scientific evidence. Let's dive deeper now into the actual feeling of it, the phenomenology of smell and memory. You mentioned that immediate emotional hit.
Yes, let's really focus on that lived experience. That immediacy is key. Remember, the olfactory signal hits the amygdala before the conscious, thinking cortex really gets a chance to process it fully.
Meaning the emotion lands first. We might feel a wave of profound sadness or sudden comfort, or maybe a flicker of unease triggered by a smell before our conscious mind can even catch up and identify the source, before we have the thought, oh, right, that's the smell of my old high school locker room.
And that very fact that the feeling precedes the thought imbues the resulting memory when it surfaces with this incredible quality of authenticity. It feels undeniably true, genuine, real.
Why? Because you didn't have time to consciously construct or rationalize the feeling. It just was.
Exactly. It's very hard for your conscious mind to argue with or dismiss an emotion that clearly arrived before your brain had even formed a coherent thought about the trigger. It feels like it comes from a deeper, more fundamental place.
Less like a story you've told yourself over the years and more like an authentic playback of a past emotional state.
That feeling of certainty is a really vital part of the Proust effect's power. And related to this, remember that evolutionary heritage we talked about?
Survival first.
Right. It means that negative olfactory association smells tied to fear, danger, or trauma are incredibly resistant to fading or extinction. From an evolutionary perspective, maintaining a strong link between a specific smell and a past danger is a high priority, potentially life-saving mechanism.
So a smell associated with a genuinely frightening event years ago remains flagged by the amygdala as an immediate potential threat detector today, even if consciously you know you're safe.
The system is biased towards preserving those danger signals. Better than, from the brain's ancient perspective.
And this combination, the immediacy, the authenticity, the emotional power, is precisely why the Proust effect is so fundamentally intertwined with the complex feeling of nostalgia.
Absolutely. Nostalgia, that bittersweet longing for the past, often tinged with both happiness and a sense of loss. When a powerful, unbidden smell memory hits.
You experience that temporal displacement you mentioned.
Exactly. You don't just intellectually recall the past from a distance. For a moment, you feel almost physically transported back in time and space. This can result in a kind of disorienting, yet often compelling, simultaneous awareness. a double consciousness.
You're physically standing here, maybe waiting for a bus in the rain, but emotionally, sensorially, you're also momentarily back in your childhood kitchen on a sunny morning, smelling coffee brewing and feeling that specific sense of peace. It's like reality momentarily splits.
It's a powerful break from the linear flow of time. And that feeling, that nostalgic transport, isn't just some fuzzy sentimentality. Psychologically, nostalgia serves really important functions for our well-being.
Like what?
Research shows nostalgia can increase feelings of social connectedness by reminding us of important past relationships. It can boost self-esteem. It provides significant emotional comfort and enhances psychological resilience, especially during times of stress or transition.
So accessing these nostalgic memories, often through smell, can actually be restorative.
Very much so. Olfactory cues seem to be perhaps the most reliable and involuntary mechanism we have for tapping into that potent, psychologically beneficial, restorative power of nostalgia.
And often, the scents that trigger this are tied to fundamental feelings of safety, comfort, or primary attachment figures, aren't they?
Yes, very often. Think about the specific scent of laundry detergent used by your mother when you were small, or the unique smell of a favorite childhood blanket, maybe the wood smoke from a family fireplace during holidays. These smells become anchors to core feelings of security.
It's like an involuntary, chemically triggered self-soothing mechanism.
That's a great way to describe it, a direct line back to foundational comfort.
But we absolutely have to acknowledge this powerful immediacy, this direct pipeline to the amygdala. It's definitely a double-edged sword.
It certainly is. The same neurological shortcut that grants instant access to profound comfort and cherished memories also grants equally immediate access to highly negative and potentially traumatic memories.
The power of smell is completely impartial in that sense. It doesn't care if the memory is good or bad.
Not at all. Odors that became associated with traumatic events, maybe the smell of stale alcohol linked to an abusive parent, the specific chemical odor of an emergency room during a crisis, perhaps the acrid smell of smoke during a fire, or even the cologne worn by an attacker. These scents can provoke intense, immediate, and persistent fear, anxiety, or panic responses, sometimes years or even decades after the event.
So for someone like a combat veteran, for example, the smell of something seemingly innocuous like burnt diesel fuel or even just damp earth under certain conditions could instantly trigger a full-blown trauma recall.
Absolutely. It can bypass any cognitive coping strategies or defenses they've consciously built up over time. The smell hits the amygdala directly, and the physiological and emotional fear response can be instantaneous and overwhelming.
That direct, unfiltered route to the amygdala ensures that those negative associations, those trauma-linked smells, remain incredibly robust and difficult to extinguish. They don't just fade into a narrative you tell yourself about a bad experience.
No, they remain live wires. They function as immediate danger signals, reflecting that powerful evolutionary mandate we discussed. Maintain reliable threat detection at all costs, because missing a danger cue could be fatal. The system is built to remember threats vividly.
Okay, so we've established the mechanisms and the profound emotional impact, both positive and negative. Now, let's look more closely at the content. What kinds of smells tend to be the most potent memory triggers? Are there common categories?
There certainly seem to be. While theoretically, any smell could become linked to a memory, research and anecdotal evidence consistently suggest that certain categories of smells tend to carry the heaviest emotional and autobiographical weight for most people. We can probably identify about 4 major categories.
Okay, what's the first? And you hinted it might be the most powerful.
First, and arguably often the most potent category, food and cultural smells. Think about it. Eating is an inherently multisensory experience. It's deeply tied to survival, pleasure, social bonding, and cultural traditions.
Right. Grandma's kitchen, holiday meals, that specific dish your family always made.
Exactly. The smell of baking bread, roasting meat, specific spices associated with ethnic cuisine. These smells are incredibly powerful because they're linked not just to personal memories, but often to our earliest experiences of comfort, care, family gatherings, and our sense of cultural identity.
That makes sense why the smell of a particular spice can instantly make someone who emigrated feel deeply connected to their homeland, even years later. It's more than just food.
It encodes social and cultural memory, too. Okay, second category, environmental smells.
Like the smell of rain.
Yes, things like rain on hot pavement, petrichor it's called, or the specific mineral tang of sea air near the ocean, the resinous scent of a pine forest, freshly cut grass, damp earth in autumn.
Why are they so effective?
Because they tend to be relatively consistent and pervasive over long periods. The chemical composition of pine scent or ocean air doesn't change drastically over decades. So these smells serve as reliable, long-lasting bridges back to specific geographical places and distinct periods of our lives. The neighborhood where you grew up, a favorite vacation spot, the smell of a particular season associated with childhood freedom.
They anchor us in place and time. Okay, category 3. This one sounds like it gets very personal.
It does. Category 3 is personal care smells. These are often profoundly intimate because they are directly linked to specific people, usually those closest to us. A parent's specific perfume or aftershave. The unique scent of baby powder associated with your own child, maybe your partner's deodorant or the laundry detergent they use. These smells are tied directly into our primary attachment relationships.
So they evoke feelings of security, comfort.
Immense comfort and security, yes. Or sometimes heartbreakingly, they can trigger complex emotions of intense loss, grief, and longing when that person is no longer with us. The scent almost becomes a tangible proxy for the absent person themselves. It's incredibly powerful.
Wow. Okay, and the final category, the ones that mark bigger life stages.
Yes, the fourth category, institutional smells. These are the characteristic scents associated with specific environments that often mark major life transitions or social roles.
Such as?
Think about the smell of chalk dust, maybe floor wax, and old paper in a school hallway instantly marking the experience of education. Or the sterile, sometimes sharp antiseptic smell, universally associated with hospitals and clinics, marking experiences of health, illness, birth, or death.
Or maybe the smell of motor oil and metal in a garage or workshop, marking an occupation or a specific phase of training or work.
Exactly. These smells become markers for significant shifts in our identity and our place in the world, moving from childhood to adolescence and school, dealing with health crises, entering a particular profession. They encode those major life chapters.
It's amazing how much information and emotion can be packed into these seemingly simple smells, and perhaps the true extent of their power, how crucial they are to our sense of self, is best understood when that sense is suddenly lost.
That's a really important point. The recent COVID-19 pandemic brought the issue of anosmia, or the loss of the sense of smell, into sharp public focus for the first time, for many.
Right. Suddenly, millions of people experienced this. And what the research and personal reports revealed was that losing your sense of smell is far, far more devastating than just losing the pleasure of tasting food properly.
It's a profound disruption, often described as a severing of one's connection to reality, to memories, and even to one's sense of self-continuity. Many studies documented people with anosmia reporting feeling deeply disconnected from their own past.
How so?
Because those spontaneous, involuntary olfactory cues, those little anchors that constantly root us in our personal history without us even noticing, they're suddenly gone. The world loses a whole dimension of familiarity and depth.
And it wasn't just memory loss. People reported a significant flattening or dulling of their overall emotional experience, didn't they? The world felt less colorful, less immediate, somehow gray. Why would losing smell flatten emotions so broadly?
Because, as we've discussed, that vital, direct, unfiltered emotional input pathway via the amygdala is suddenly cut off. You lose that constant, subtle, high-impact emotional commentary that the olfactory system provides about your environment, about people, about food, about everything.
That's like a background emotional soundtrack suddenly went silent.
Exactly. When you sever that oldest, most direct link between the outside world and the brain's core emotional centers, a significant layer of sensory richness, one that contributes profoundly to our personality, our identity, and our moment-to-moment feeling of being alive, is abruptly removed. Life literally feels less vibrant.
It truly underscores how critically intertwined olfactory memory and perception are with our fundamental sense of self. We completely take that reliable sensory bridge to our past and our emotions for granted until it's suddenly gone.
It really highlights its importance.
Yeah.
And this understanding also has crucial implications for how we care for people as they age, particularly those experiencing cognitive decline.
How so? Does smell perception hold up better in aging?
Well, overall, olfactory sensitivity does naturally tend to decline somewhat with age, that's true. However, research consistently shows that those very early, deeply encoded olfactory memories, those OEAMs from childhood and youth, often remain surprisingly accessible, even when other forms of memory, like verbal recall, are becoming quite challenging.
And this is hugely relevant for dementia care, I imagine.
Absolutely. In conditions like Alzheimer's disease, where verbal communication and conscious recall of recent events or even family members can be severely impaired, familiar scents can sometimes act as a powerful key.
Even when someone can't remember their spouse's name, the smell of their spouse's lifelong hand cream, Might still trigger something.
It might trigger a feeling of familiarity, of comfort, and emotional recognition, even if they can't consciously place it. A specific perfume, the smell of a favorite food cooking, a scent associated with a cherished hobby. These can sometimes bypass the damaged cognitive circuits.
Because they tap directly into those older, deeper emotional and episodic memory centers that might be less affected initially.
That's the idea. Olfactory stimulation, unlike trying to force verbal recall, which requires high-level cortical function, can sometimes activate those core centers directly. It can act as a powerful, non-verbal lifeline back to a sense of identity, offering profound comfort, reducing agitation, and providing a fleeting moment of continuity in what can be a very confusing and disorienting world for the patient.
Using smell as a therapeutic tool for connection and comfort in dementia care, that's really promising.
It's an area of growing interest, definitely.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and talk about some cultural differences and practical applications of all this knowledge. You mentioned earlier that smell is hard to describe. It's ineffability.
Yes, let's touch on that complex, often overlooked aspect, what some linguists and psychologists call the language problem with smell. One of the most unique psychological features of olfaction, especially in Western cultures, is how intensely ineffable it is. Our languages are notoriously impoverished when it comes to describing smells precisely.
Right. We almost always default to describing the source of the smell. It smells like coffee, or it smells like wet dog. Or we borrow adjectives from other senses. We say a scent is heavy, or sharp, or sweet, or dark. We lack a rich vocabulary of abstract words dedicated purely to describing olfactory qualities themselves.
Exactly. And think about how this links back to the neuroanatomy we discussed. Since the primary olfactory pathway largely bypasses the cortical areas heavily involved in language processing, the raw experience of scent often feels intensely private, deeply personal, and profoundly resistant to being shared effectively through language.
You can describe a painting in detail or recount a conversation word for word, but trying to truly communicate the precise, complex smell of your childhood attic or a specific forest floor to someone who hasn't smelled it, it's almost impossible.
It really is. And this inability to easily translate the experience into shared language might actually contribute to why smell memories often feel so intensely personal and authentic. They feel like your private truth, untouched by the need to conform to social consensus or squeeze them into generalized words.
But you also mentioned this might be more of a cultural limitation than a universal human brain limitation.
That's a crucial clarification, yes. While the neural pathways are universal, the linguistic tools we develop are culturally shaped. Consider the fascinating example of the Jahai people, an indigenous group living in the Malay Peninsula. Anthropological linguists studying them found they possess a remarkably rich, abstract vocabulary specifically dedicated to describing pure odor qualities, independent of the source.
Really? Like what kinds of distinctions can they make that we typically miss in English?
They have specific single words for complex smell concepts. For instance, one word might describe the particular pungent yet pleasant, slightly oily smell associated with things like certain types of wood polish, bear cats, or some ripe fruits, a category we just don't have a single abstract term for. Another word might capture a specific kind of deep, metallic, slightly fishy or blood-like odor common to certain animals and substances.
So they have dozens of these abstract smell descriptors.
They do. It strongly suggests that if a culture pays close attention to smell, values it as a primary mode of sensory information, and needs to communicate about it precisely, then the linguistic tools can and will develop. It forces us to question whether our own culture's lack of the sophisticated olfactory language has perhaps diminished our conscious awareness and appreciation of this sense.
That's a fascinating inversion. Maybe our inability to easily talk about smell reinforces the subconscious idea that it's just less important than sight or hearing, when neurologically it's so fundamental.
It's certainly a possibility worth considering. Now, moving from language to more practical applications, this deep understanding of smell's direct neurological pathway has significant implications for therapeutic uses beyond just basic aromatherapy.
Right. Basic aromatherapy often relies on learned positive associations like lavender equals calm, but you're talking about more sophisticated uses.
Absolutely. Particularly in mental health, there's growing interest in research into therapies like olfactory exposure therapy, especially for conditions involving trauma like PTSD or specific phobias.
How would that work? Wouldn't introducing a trauma-related smell be risky?
It requires extremely careful control and therapeutic guidance, of course. But the idea might involve, in a safe and controlled setting, using a carefully chosen, perhaps diluted or related, but not overwhelming, scent to help the patient access and process the traumatic memory without being completely re-traumatized or overwhelmed. It's about carefully revisiting the memory with new coping resources.
Okay. And you also mentioned using smells positively.
Yes. Conversely, therapists are increasingly utilizing the concept of an olfactory anchor. This involves guiding a patient to intentionally associate a specific, pleasant, and easily portable scent, like a particular essential oil on a handkerchief, say lavender or pine, with feelings of safety, calm, and grounding during therapy sessions.
So they build a strong positive association.
Exactly. Then, when the patient experiences rising anxiety, distress, or feels triggered in their daily life, they can consciously use that anchor scent. Inhaling it provides an immediate nonverbal cue that taps directly into the amygdala, helping to reactivate those learned feelings of security and calm, acting as a powerful tool for self-regulation.
Using that primal pathway proactively for immediate comfort, that sounds incredibly useful. And we're seeing similar thinking applied in architectural and environmental design now too, aren't we? Recognizing that the smell of a place matters.
Yes, absolutely. There's a growing awareness that the scentscape of an environment profoundly contributes to its overall emotional impact, people's comfort levels, and even its memorability. We see it obviously with hotels using unique signature scents diffused in their lobbies to build brand identity and positive memory associations.
You check into a certain hotel chain anywhere in the world, and that familiar scent makes you feel instantly at home in their brand.
Precisely. But it's also being applied more thoughtfully. For example, in designing trauma-informed care settings, like shelters or healthcare facilities, there's now a focus on eliminating potentially triggering institutional smells like harsh chemical cleaners or strong antiseptic odors, which can inadvertently induce anxiety in vulnerable populations based on past negative associations. They aim for neutral or subtly pleasant, calming scents instead.
Creating environments that feel safer on a subconscious olfactory level. Okay, this leads us squarely into perhaps a more controversial application. The whole world of scent marketing, or ambient scenting.
Ah, yes. The strategic, often invisible use of specific smells by businesses specifically to influence consumer behavior, mood, and purchasing decisions.
This is a huge industry now, right?
It is. Retailers, particularly in fashion, use carefully crafted, recognizable brand scents. You walk into certain apparel stores or sneaker shops, and they have a distinct, pervasive smell designed to create positive, maybe luxurious or youthful associations with their products.
And the classic real estate agent trick of baking cookies or brewing coffee before an open house.
That's a low-tech version of the same principle. Diffusing vanilla or baked good scents is known to evoke feelings of hominess, comfort, and nostalgia, potentially making prospective buyers feel more positively disposed towards a property. Even the engineered new car smell falls into this category.
Okay, so what's the ethical problem here? Businesses use appealing visuals and music all the time. Why is scent marketing potentially more problematic?
The core ethical concern comes directly from everything we've discussed about the olfactory pathway. Because these engineered smells often exert their influence on our emotions and potentially our decisions below the threshold of conscious analysis or critical awareness.
Because the smell hits the amygdala and triggers a feeling before our cortex has a chance to really evaluate it critically.
That's the crux of it. Unlike a loud visual advertisement that shouts, "Buy me," or a salesperson making a persuasive pitch, both of which we can consciously recognize, analyze, maybe criticize, and choose to resist. We have far fewer natural intellectual defenses against olfactory influence. It sneaks in under the conscious radar.
It's a form of potentially unconscious manipulation.
That's the argument many ethicists make. If a store fills the air with a scent scientifically designed to trigger feelings of nostalgia, luxury, or security, are they essentially hacking your amygdala to nudge you towards making a purchase you might not have made based purely on rational thought or need?
It definitely raises questions about consumer autonomy and informed consent. If you're not even consciously aware that your positive feeling is being subtly manufactured by the air you're breathing.
Precisely. Should there be regulations, perhaps similar to those governing subliminal visual messages in advertising? Should businesses be more transparent about the intentional use of ambient scents designed purely to influence mood and purchasing behavior? It's a sensory input that operates so differently from vision or hearing that it arguably demands its own conscious ethical debate.
A lot to think about there. This whole exploration has been absolutely fascinating, tracing smell from basic survival right through to modern marketing ethics.
It really covers a vast territory.
So if we try to summarize the real core of this deep dive, what we fundamentally learned today seems to be that memory isn't just some kind of intellectual computer-like retrieval of data files in our heads.
No, it's far from that.
It's a profoundly embodied, deeply sensory, and intensely emotional experience. Our past is lived not just in our minds, but in our bodies and through our senses.
Beautifully put. And smell, thanks to its unique neuroanatomy, that direct line, bypassing the thalamus, straight into the heart of the limbic system, provides this uniquely powerful, incredibly immediate, and emotionally laden channel to access those deepest autobiographical truths.
The Proust effect isn't just a literary curiosity, it's a fundamental neurological gift. It offers us this direct, unfiltered line back to who we were, what we genuinely felt, and where we were during some of the most formative moments of our lives.
It truly does. And maybe understanding this encourages all of us listening to pause occasionally and consciously cultivate a bit more olfactory awareness in our day-to-day lives.
How so?
Just by paying a little more attention. Recognizing that noticing and appreciating the unique smells we encounter today, the smell of the seasons changing, the scent of a particular place, the aroma of food being prepared, isn't just about enhancing the present moment. It's also, in a way, actively laying down the richest, most emotionally textured memory traces that we might have access to decades from now.
We're banking future Proust effects by paying attention now.
You could think of it that way, yes. And as we wrap up, perhaps we can consider the future landscape of smell and memory. Some of the source material we looked at highlighted a rather worrying environmental trend.
It is.
It's the idea that due to multiple factors, things like climate change, altering ecosystems, industrial agriculture, widespread use of sanitizers, global homogenization of products and lifestyles, we are potentially losing the sheer diversity of smells in our world. The distinct, complex sense of specific seasons, unique natural ecosystems, and characteristic regional traditions might be diminishing.
Our world is becoming, in an olfactory sense, more bland, more uniform. The natural and cultural smellscape is getting less complex.
That's the concern, which leads us to a crucial and perhaps final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away and mull over. If we continue down this path of sanitizing, standardizing, and homogenizing our environments, losing the unique smells that define specific places, times of year, and cultural practices, are we also inadvertently potentially losing access to entire swaths of future memory? Are we impoverishing the potential richness of the Proust effect for generations to come?
Wow.
And if so, what steps might we need to take, both personally in appreciating the smells around us and perhaps collectively as a culture, to consciously preserve the olfactory diversity of our world? By doing so, are we not just saving sense, but also safeguarding the potential depth and richness of our collective and individual pasts yet to be lived?